Welcome back to our journey together here on Bridge the Gap. Today, we will dive into a pivotal chapter of my life, one that I like to call the awakening phase. But before we jump in, let's just take a moment to recap where we've been. We have journeyed a little bit through my childhood, a teeny tiny bit through my adolescence, a little brief encounter with my early adulthood, and now for the part of my adulthood where I realized that I needed help. As a child, I was raised by emotionally immature parents and suffered from physical, mental, and narcissistic abuse, as well as emotional neglect. And these traumatic childhood events created deep, long lasting imprints on my foundation, my personality, and my perception of the world around me. I suffered from body dysmorphia, depression, anxiety, and PTSD. I developed habits of people pleasing while having trust issues, a low self worth, self-doubt, and fear of intimacy. My lack of boundaries, my perfectionism, my hypervigilance, and avoidant behaviors, they led to a recipe of burnout and confusion. Now, fast forward just a little bit to my early adulthood, I was determined to break free from my past, even if it meant living out of my car. I juggled college, sports, 3 jobs. I joined the military. I got deployed. When I came back from deployment, my child had absolutely no idea who I was. I had 2 miscarriages. I went through 2 pregnancies all by myself, and I was working 12-hour shifts, all while my husband was out pursuing his dreams. It was a lot, but I just kept going like that dang Energizer bunny. But here's the kicker. I had one problem despite all of my resilience. I never addressed the root causes of any of my struggles. I never healed on that emotional level. I just kept pushing through, thinking that sheer willpower would see me through. Striving and having to fight to persist is such an amazing trait to have. Never giving up under pressure, never backing down when the going gets tough, sucking it up, keep going to make it through any single challenge that was thrown my way. Resisting to failure and persisting to success. But resilience is like a pause button. It is not a completion button. And I wish that I had recognized that sooner. Resilience is an amazing thing to have. It can be a protective factor that can mitigate the effects of trauma. But over-reliance on resilience without addressing underlying emotional pain, it can lead to burnout and long-term psychological distress. Trauma-informed care emphasizes the importance of balancing resilience with emotional healing. You can keep going and going and going, but until you heal, unless you address the root cause, that thing that you're being resilient over, you will eventually get tired out and burn out. I promise you will. Again, resilience is like a pause button. It's not a completion button, which is something that I really wish that I had during this next phase of my life, just to be done and complete. And I like to call this next phase of my life the awakening phase. So as I had said before, I was working 12-hour shifts. I was pregnant, taking care of 2 kids, basically being a single mom. And your girl, she needed some help, okay? And it was kind of at that perfect timing because my dad was going through a really tough time in New Jersey. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but he had told me that work was slow and that his house was being foreclosed on. So me and my husband gave my parents a way out of their hardship in New Jersey while also trying to benefit us at the same time. The people pleaser in me wanted to uplift my dad's spirits from losing the house that we built together. And I knew it was a hard loss for him, and I wanted to help him to a better state of mind. So my husband and I said that we would go half into building a house with him, something that my dad had been talking about for years, ever since the 2008 market crash. So we said, yeah, you know what? We're going to go half in, build a duplex, all cash. You get half, we get half, and it's going to be great. My parents didn't have to pay any bills when they lived with us and as we were building the house because they were in a financial bind. And I was just getting another bonus from the military for my job, so everything was going to be working out just great. And I figured if we built this house, all cash, my parents would never be homeless ever again. They would never lose their house, as long as they were paying their taxes, which in Texas was a significant decrease from New Jersey. So I thought I was doing something good, helping set up my parents for the rest of their lives so they never had to lose a home again and allowing them to have that security. that they would be able to be close with us and see my kids and have that interaction and that connection with their grandkids. Plus, I would be having someone to be able to watch my kids in case one of them got sick and needed to stay home from school. So that way, people at work would just stay off my back. It was a win-win all around. So we all agreed. We started prepping and planning for everything, found the land we were going to build on. We drew up the blueprints, and I began getting my house ready to be sold. It was about 2 weeks before I gave birth. Me, my dad, and my husband, we started to buy the materials that we needed to start building this new house. Why on God's green earth did I think that in the last few weeks of my pregnancy that I should be buying rebar and building materials and begin the process of building a house? I have absolutely no idea. I must have been so desperate or just out of my mind at this point, or I was just convinced that I had 3 months off of work that we could just make so much progress in this time. And, this wasn't my first rodeo. I had 2 other kids, so I knew what it took to raise a newborn. And I guess I just thought I was Superwoman or something, but, spoiler alert, I was not. A few weeks before giving birth, normal moms, they're nesting, they're folding clothes, they're getting the nursery ready. No, not me. I'm over here, having yard sales, selling all my belongings, trying to get my house ready to stage it for photos, still trying to plan and have my daughter's birthday party and collect building materials to start building a house, all while working 12-hour shifts and almost ready to pop out a baby. I am telling you guys, I was completely off my rocker. That survival mode is a doozy, so watch out for it. It will cloud your judgment so fast and having you do the wildest things. So I had my baby. We took some vacation time. We typically took a few weeks to travel after having our babies, just so that our families could see them. We would typically leave after their 2-week appointment and be back before their 4-week appointment. Plus, it was always summer when we had our babies, so the escape was nice. We'd always go to the beach and things like that. So, I know so many people cringe at the thought that I traveled the world with my kids at such a young age, but I think it helped develop their immune system. But anyways, we went and we visited my family in New Jersey. We went to the beach. We went to Illinois to see my husband's family. Then we went back to home to Texas. I had a lot going on. I just had a baby. We were traveling. I was the maid of honor for my best friend's wedding. She had her bachelorette party. So I was traveling back and forth to New Jersey multiple times. After giving birth, I continued my relentless pace, even pouring and shoveling concrete for our new home just 2 months post C-section. And I'm going to tell you guys, I felt so terrified that somehow I was going to tear from the inside out. But I just kept shoveling, kept pushing that cement in between the rebar, building that foundation. But beneath the surface, I was battling intense postpartum depression that I had convinced myself was just stress. And I look back now in complete disbelief. Like, what in the world was I actually thinking? Why did I put myself through all of that? I remember having internal thoughts of, as soon as this is all done, everything's going to be okay. I just need to work a little harder, a little longer, and everything is going to be okay. The guilt and the shame that I felt for so long for taking so much time away from my kids during this process took me such a long time to heal from. And honestly, it was one of the hardest healings that I had ever had to go through and heal myself from. I know they were fine. They were just going to school, being kids, but the distance that I placed between us, the way that I chose work and chose production over my own children is just something that never aligned with me. And I had to work through all of that guilt to finally forgive myself. I know many people have told me, you're just doing what's best for you and your family. You're striving for success. But like I said, it had taken a long time for me to forgive myself around those months and those moments. I did end up developing an intense case of postpartum depression throughout all of this chaos. But at the time, like I said, I didn't know it. I couldn't recognize it. I just thought I was stressed out. So I just kept going and kept pushing through all of my own feelings and pushing down my emotions. We eventually got the new house built. We moved in and we sold our house. And this was when the universe said, all right, buckle up, sweetheart. You took all this time and effort to build something. Let's tear it all down and start all over. Everything I'm about to go over here happened in just a little bit under 11 months. So you guys might want to take a few deep breaths here. So we found out that my husband had gotten selected to go through pilot training, which was such an amazing accomplishment. And I was so proud of him. He didn't even think that he would get picked for the slot. And he was on his way to fulfilling his dream. My husband graduated college and then he commissioned. 2 huge milestones in our plan. Check, done, complete. Then 2 weeks later, he was in Colorado for training. Financially, things began to feel a little bit better and not so confined because after he commissioned, he began to bring home a paycheck. And finally, things felt okay in that department. We weren't scrounging to make it by. Let me tell you, having your parents live with you while you're trying to be a grown-up is like trying to cook a flippin' gourmet meal in a microwave. It just doesn't work out. It was really hard. I felt the suffocation. I felt the confinement feelings that I felt as a child slowly creeping back in. Except this time, the house was half mine. I paid the bills. I paid for the groceries. I took care of my kids. And once again, I was taking care of my parents. Sure, it wasn't all bad. My parents did watch my kids when my husband and I finally treated ourselves on a romantic getaway. After 4 years of barely scraping by and hardly seeing each other, we needed some time together. But watching my kids consisted of dropping them off at daycare at 7 a.m., picking them up at 5 p.m., making them dinner, having them shower, and put them to bed. Nothing too crazy. Plus, my parents were constantly insisting. So we tried to take advantage of this time when my husband returned from Colorado. We tried to spend as much time as we could as a family during the summer before my daughter had to go back to school and before my husband went back to training. We traveled to a few places with our kids. We did some family reunions. We tried to be with each other to make up for all of the separation and lost time. And I'm telling you, it was such a great summer just spending time with my family. But just like the ebb and flow of life, with the highs, there's going to be lows. And a few months prior to giving birth, I had gotten this new job at Quality Assurance. I was put in charge of all the quality assurance programs. So I was drowning in my efforts to try to sift through all of these AFIs or Air Force instructions to ensure that we wouldn't fail our next big inspection. I only had a few months to go through about 13 programs, scrubbed them all before I had my baby, and went on maternity leave. I was not able to complete them all, and it didn't help that they weren't updated in years. But I did my best, and when I got back from maternity leave, they were going through that major inspection. We didn't do too well. No one finished updating the program binders, even though they distributed the programs out to everyone after I went on maternity leave. So the programs were no longer mine. Everyone else had the programs after I basically fixed most of them. But we had a few dings, nothing too serious. But of course, one of my supervisors, who I found out later just absolutely hated me. Of course, to him, I was the one to blame because I didn't completely revamp all of them before going out and having my baby. Even though I did all of the hardest work that needed to be done, and there were just basically like T's to cross and I's to handle, nothing too crazy. But this one supervisor, he just had it out for me, and I have no idea why. I always thought that we were fine, but apparently he had this vengeance against me or something. But during this inspection, I told him that I had a doctor appointment. But when the inspectors came, he had me take them out to the flight line and show them some things. We were not allowed to have our phones or our watches or anything like that. No jewelry on the flight line. So just as a little tip here, it was just a safety violation. One that we took very, very seriously at our base. And one of the inspectors, they had a watch on. So I said, hey, listen, man, I'm not trying to set you up or anything. I see you have a watch on. We're really not supposed to have watches out here just because of the AFI and everything. But could you please tell me the time because I have an important appointment to go to that I cannot miss. My supervisor, who just kind of sort of followed us out there, I don't really know what he was doing, but he just kind of like lurked around and like watched us, I guess. He just gave me this death stare of a look. And I was like, dude, I have an appointment. I was basically trying to cover my ass, acknowledging that this inspector had an unauthorized piece of jewelry out on the flight line, calling it out so that I didn't get a write-up for not saying something. But I actually really needed to know the time so that I could get to my appointment. I went to my appointment and they had to take some samples just to make sure that I didn't have ovarian cancer. And they said that they would call me tomorrow with results and all these things. Well, the inspectors had come back the next day to finish up. And again, I told my supervisor that my doctor should be calling me at 1 p.m. and I have to take this call because it is a phone call appointment and it's important. Not to mention that in the military, if you miss an appointment, you get written up. Like, yes, even for a phone call appointment, it was really bad for missed appointments back then. And what do you know? 1 p.m. rolls around, almost on the dot, and my supervisor walks up to me and asks me to show the inspectors our impound program and take them out to our impounded aircraft. So as I'm speaking to the inspectors, my doctor calls through and I ask them to please excuse me for just a moment, which that in itself to me, it's just completely unprofessional. You know, when you're going through a major inspection and you're walking inspectors through something and having to walk away to take a phone call, it just is, it's very unprofessional. So I just hated being put in that position to have to make that decision to walk away. But my doctor then proceeded to tell me that I was positive for ovarian cancer, like all the cells and things that were coming back that showed that I had cancer. You know, I walked into the hallway and I'm not going to lie, guys, I cried. I cried. And then, you know, I wiped my tears real quick. And as soon as I could breathe for a minute, and I stepped back into the office. And as soon as I got into that office, I was bombarded with, Nikki, I asked you to show them the impounded jet. Why haven't you taken them yet? Listen, guys, I have had years of training of hiding my emotions, but there's no way that he did not see that I was crying. Even one of the inspectors just looked at my supervisor like, dude, what is your deal? Obviously, there's something wrong. Like, this inspector knew something was up. But he just kept looking at me with his concerned face as I was describing the program with my voice cracking. He had saw this confident person from the day before turn into a completely different person. And it's kind of crazy when a complete stranger can pick up on the energy that something wasn't okay. And my supervisor, he had no idea. He was completely oblivious. I could tell this inspector knew something was up because every time my supervisor came over to me, he just kind of watched our interaction. And when the inspector would ask someone in my shop a question and they would walk over to me and say, hey, Nikki, the inspector would be like, oh, you know what? It's not a big deal. I was just asking. Research shows that stress can profoundly impact your body, especially during significant life changes and having significant life-changing news. So when we experience chronic stress, our bodies can just enter this constant state of fight or flight, leading to physical symptoms like fatigue and anxiety. So it's no wonder why I was just, crawling out of my skin this entire time. And it's a shame, but often those people who are closest to you, they may miss the signs of your struggles. They can be so oblivious to your internal battles, just as my coworkers were and my supervisor when I was hiding my emotions during this major inspection after receiving this news about my health. It is a common phenomenon. Sometimes we just become so good at masking our pain that even those who know us the best, they won't even see it because we've gotten that good at hiding it. I dealt with the new reproductive issues for months, but, luckily after time and taking care of myself, running more tests, everything turned out to be benign and I was okay. Which was great because my husband had to leave us once again to continue more pilot training. And this time he was only 4 hours away, luckily still in Texas. So he would come home on most weekends and we fell back into our old patterns. And at this time, my sister, she needed some help with her 2 kids as she had some unexpected life changes happening in her life. So we decided to take them in and help her out. All of a sudden, it was like my life was going good, then bam, all hell broke loose. Over the span of a few months, things started to get out of hand. I was trying to take care of 9 people, and all of this old family drama just came out of the woodwork and resurfaced out of thin air. All of my siblings were fighting, my parents were fighting, and it was just like, I was just over here, like, what in the world just happened? The summer was great. I was gone. I was traveling. I was happy. I escaped this place. And then as soon as I get back home, it is like I am in my childhood home once again. My parents are arguing because my mom is smoking. Our whole lives, my parents fought because my mom smoked cigarettes and my dad hated it. So my mom always snuck cigarettes. And it was like this huge argument my whole entire life. It was just the dumbest thing. And, the back and forth with the he said, she said, it was just like someone just lit a fuse of negativity and just like threw the bomb on in. Again, it just felt like I was in my childhood home all over again. Trying to keep it very surface level just for time's sake, between the arguing, the fights between my siblings and my parents, CPS coming to the house, my mom attacking me at dinner because I stuck up for myself, it was like PTSD, but in real life. That cyclic pattern happening all over again right in front of me. And although I tried to stay out of it, I physically couldn't. Things got so bad that my mom came over to me and she put her hands on me in front of all 5 kids. And I'm not too sure if she just thought it was going to be like the time she threw me out of the house or when she hit me like when I was young or, we're just going to forget and pretend like it never happened in the morning and everything's going to be fine. But I wasn't going to be hit, scratched, and punched in front of my children. I realized then that I needed to prioritize my safety and the safety of my kids. So unfortunately, I did have to call the police on my mom and she did spend the night in jail. I just didn't feel safe in that house anymore. And it was like an evil box of spirits was just opened and let loose to roam around. I just can't even explain the energy that I felt around us. So I called my husband. I packed my bags really quick. After the police took her, I grabbed my kids and I spent the night at a hotel. I was not sure if my dad or my sisters were going to bail her out, but I wasn't going to be there to find out. In the morning, I dropped off my kids at school. I told my supervisor that I was not coming into work and that I was checking myself into mental health and that I would let them know what happened. And I went to my mental health session. And then I went back to the house after work by myself to get some more clothes and stuff for my kids. A few years later, I did find out that my dad had told one of my sisters that he didn't bail my mom out so she could feel what it felt like to be left in jail overnight after all the times that she put him in jail, and he thought it was kind of funny. Kind of like getting a taste of her own medicine kind of thing. But I didn't see anything funny about the situation. The whole situation, everything that happened, it was like a turning point, a moment of clarity among the chaos. I had to separate myself from this energy. It wasn't me. It wasn't who I am. It did not align with me. The family rumors, the fighting, I moved to Texas. I joined the military to get away from all of that. And here it was in this brand new space that I created and built for myself. I knew there had to be a change. So my kids and I, we stayed in a hotel for about 5 days. And my husband and I decided that me and the kids, we were not going back to that house. And we were not going to subject our kids to that type of behavior. So we started looking for a house. In the meantime, one of my friends was so amazing. He said instead of staying at a hotel, wasting money, that me and my kids could stay with him and his kids until we finalized buying a house, which we had bought, closed, and moved into our new house in just a month. And of course, people like to start drama and they like to start rumors, especially in the military. It's worse than high school sometimes, honestly. So my friend's daughter and my daughter, they went to the same school, they were in the same class, and I guess they had said something about the fact that they were living under the same roof or something. Well, in a small military town, people talk, and the next day, I had a supervisor pull me to the side and ask if I was living with my friend. And I was like, yes, just until my house is finalized, which is just in a few weeks. We're about to close. Like, it's just for a couple weeks. He went off on how unprofessional it looked for me staying at a divorced man's house with my kids and that people are talking, saying that we're sleeping together. In my mind, I'm just like, dude, I just had to force myself to go see mental health. My family's falling apart. I just put my mom in jail. I'm currently homeless with my kids. My husband isn't here to help me. And you're worried people are saying me and my friend are sleeping together? I was in complete disbelief. Like, dude, go get effed. Like, I don't care what people think. I am doing what I need to do to get out of a bad situation and trying not to financially destroy my family in the process. Then he had the audacity to ask me if my husband knew that I was living there with my friend. And I was like, yes, in fact, he is driving back to town and staying with us tonight. I was honestly, I was just completely dumbfounded at the lack of support and help that I got when I opened up to my supervision about my situation. You know, these people who were always preaching about, come to me, I can help you, whatever you need. Don't ever feel like you have to do it alone. Like all this BS that they would put out there and then, you know, come at me like that. It was just so like out of left field. And I was just completely shocked at the way that they handled the situation. And the only reason that I opened up to them was because after the episode with my mom, I checked myself into mental health. I couldn't take it anymore. The energy in my body wanted to scream and escape and was crawling out of my skin, and I didn't know how to handle it. Mental health said that because of my situation, they would have to inform my supervision. So I figured that I would tell them and let them know everything that was going on before being blindsided, you know, as a common courtesy. I thought that they would try to help me in some way, but they pretty much just let me drown. Honestly, they put their feet on top of my face and held me under even longer, and then threw accusations my way. It was just completely bizarre. I did have a few people try to help, but there wasn't much they could do given their positions. All they could do was provide friendly or spiritual advice, and I tried to do as much as I could. My husband's commander even said that if I could get down there to his base for like a temp job or something, that they would like create a job for me. My functional and everyone else on my side completely denied me and said no because of manning, because we didn't have enough 7 levels and that we didn't have enough people for it and that they couldn't afford to lose me. And in my mind, I'm just like, man, you've already lost me. I'm losing my mind. But thankfully, we were able to close and move into this new house extremely quickly. And as I had said, I had checked myself into mental health. I was terrified. It was so stigmatized in the military, you know, fears of getting kicked out. So many repercussions were discussed around going to mental health. Like if you go, something horrible is going to happen to your career. You're going to get kicked out, you know, all these terrible things. But I didn't care. Like I just couldn't take it anymore. That's the point that I was at. And I was just in that weird space of not wanting to die, but also not wanting to be here and having absolutely no way of navigating that new uncharted space. I had no clue what to do, but luckily the psychiatrist that I was seeing recommended some books, some YouTube videos, and some people, and I dove right on in on my healing. I am pretty sure she was like a closet energy healer or something because she was exactly what I needed. She gave me spirituality with logic. Yes, my psychiatrist. She told me to go meditate near water, go next to the lake, go journal. You know, I had a lot of self-realizations and healings happen during this time. Probably because I completely separated myself from everybody. It was just me and my kids. I pretty much blocked everyone out of my life, of course, as a form of energetic protection. When we are under extreme stress, it is common to block out toxic influences from our lives. And this is just a protective mechanism. So I had to draw boundaries to safeguard my well-being, which was essential for my healing. But as I went through all of this, I eventually surrendered to spirit, and my life was changed forever. I was still working through all of those reproductive issues during this time. I was also in a position where many of my peers didn't even believe that I deserved to be there in the job position that I was in. You know, even a few supervisors hated the fact that I got asked to come over and go into those positions. You may ask, maybe, are you assuming people didn't like you because of your overthinking in childhood? But I was told by multiple people that this person doesn't like you. They think that you don't deserve the position, or so and so said, I wonder what position she was in to get that position, things like that. But here's the funny thing. I never applied for any of those jobs that I got. I never thought I was qualified enough or worthy of them. So why would I ever apply? I was always emailed and asked to come over for an interview for all the positions that I ever got. Yet so many people still talked behind my back. I guess they didn't realize that I had these spiritual gifts, right? I did actually hear a few people myself talking in the hallways and things like that. But it's just such an off-putting feeling when people are so fake to your face, especially when you've worked with these people for so many years. But that's life and that's people. Most of them had their own healings that they refused to face, but I usually just shrugged it off. So at this point, I really had no one, just me and my kids during the week, and then my husband on the weekends, just like when he was in college. We were just back where we started. I had only worked with my psychiatrist for just a few months, so maybe like 4 or 5 sessions, but it was a very open and progressive few months. I had even opened up to her with my fears of being schizophrenic. She kind of laughed at me and asked, like, why would you think that you would be schizophrenic? And I told her, my mom was schizophrenic, my dad's mom was, only because I was told this. And I was told by my father, and I was terrified that it was true. And now I'm over here losing my mind and feeling like I'm going crazy. Again, she kind of laughed while I was over here just covered in tears, crying on her couch. She said, I have not seen anything in any of our sessions that would indicate you having schizophrenia. And she said, to be honest, I think you would be an excellent therapist. And she said, you know exactly what you have to do. You're just extremely limited being in the military, and with your current environment, you're just stuck. There's nowhere else to go, and you figured it out, and now you're at the wall and there's nowhere else to go. And that's where you're at. And I just remember thinking, like, yeah, I know, but like that doesn't help the confinement. Like that doesn't help me if like I've already gotten myself to the point of where you can get me. How's that helping me? But to be honest, the biggest life-changing thing she said to me was that it was extremely unlikely that I suffered from schizophrenia and that I showed no symptoms. Just hearing that, basically that I wasn't crazy, it unlocked those heavy chains of fear that I carried around my entire life. She introduced me to the terms of gaslighting and narcissism. She taught me how to set boundaries in my life, and that saying no is a complete sentence and it is completely okay. She had even told me to stop working and stop doing things. And I just had to laugh like, lady, are you crazy? I'm in the military. That's just like not a thing. I'm a mom. Dishes and laundry, like that stuff doesn't do itself. And she's just said, you need to be moved to a job where you aren't relied on and that you can be left alone for the most part. And if those dishes are in the sink, leave them there. And I remember thinking, like, how am I supposed to stop being a workaholic? I actually laughed at her suggestion to leave the dishes in the sink because I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. But deep down, I knew that she was right. I needed to prioritize my healing over my usual hustle. I had to put aside my pride and my fears of hurting my reputation and people thinking that I wasn't good enough. I had to put it aside. And honestly, I felt like the biggest POS when I decided to take my healing seriously. It was just when I was about to switch jobs and go back to the flight line to do aircraft maintenance again. My time and quality assurance was up, and it was about time to move jobs anyway. So I went to my soon-to-be supervisors and I let them know my situation, and they had been so understanding. It was such a different dynamic from when I left the flight line the first time because we had gotten so many different people from different bases, and they were fighter crew chiefs and things like that. So they were completely different. But these people were so understanding. It was, like I said, just a different dynamic from when I was originally on the flight line. The guy that I spoke to, he completely understood. And he said the next day that he spoke to some people and he said, on Monday, you will be working in tool crib. which is just a place on the flight line where maintainers will come and check in and out of their tools. It's just a tool accountability system kind of center where the maintainers need to keep their tools. I did have to run some programs back there, but for the most part, people just left me alone. The programs that I ran required me to leave the office to go get iPads fixed, tools recalibrated and vehicle maintenance done. So it was so nice to not just be completely stuck in my office and be able to escape all by myself on those short drives to those other buildings. I did have to share an office, but the guy that I shared my office with, man, he was completely chill. Everyone in that shop really was very chill. I let them know that I had stuff going on, but they pretty much just allowed me to do what I needed to do, go to my appointments and take care of myself. As long as my jobs were being completed, they were completely fine with whatever I did. Although they did leave me alone for the most part, I still remember feeling like I was crawling out of my skin the whole time being at work. If somebody needed something from me, I would just have to take a deep breath and do it because I was trying to hide my agitation and frustration inside. I was just like, why does everybody need something from me? It's always constant. Somebody is constantly needing something from me. I'm trying to do my own healing. Just everyone, please leave me alone. It was just this internal battle. And it was weird and completely unlike me. I never allowed myself to not care about my job or to care if things succeeded or if they failed. I never placed so much focus on trying to make myself heal and get better. It was always about everything else being better and taken care of before me. So it was very, very weird stepping into this new energy of taking care of myself first. As I had said, there were some excellent people back there. They never got to see the workaholic Nikki because I had stepped back, but they were all still extremely respectful and patient with me. They didn't treat me differently, and they were the most understanding and compassionate men that I have ever worked with. And it's funny because they even brought me to laugh in my deep depressional state. I had wanted to dye my hair. Sometimes people get the urge to do external changes like dyeing their hair or getting a new haircut and things like that, new outfits to reflect their internal transformation. So I was doing my healing. So it's normal, to do this. I was doing my internal healing and my physical transformation turned out to be just horrible. It was about 4 different colors in about 2 weeks from trying to get it fixed. The joke in the shop was, this wasn't the color I was going for. And they even wrote that on my plaque that they gave me when I left. Something so tragic. Because the first lady completely destroyed and burnt off most of my hair. Then she cut it off so short. Oh my gosh, I'm telling y'all, it was so terrible. Then the second lady who tried to transition it to a normal color, because in the military it has to be a natural color. She was trying to transition it to the normal color through, it takes a process. But I had lost so much hair, but at least it looked somewhat of a normal color, so I was okay and I wasn't bald, so that's good. But in the short few months that I was in Toll Crib, my husband had finished pilot school in Texas and was ready to go to Alabama. And I knew I was just stuck in Texas and I began to lose some hope. But with all of my new reading and all of my spiritual connections and development, I tried to lean in and I tried to have faith. My first sergeant had told me about an option to get out early called a Palace Chase. So I filled out all the paperwork, I routed it up, and I got denied at the commander level. And I remember coming to terms with everything like, me really being alone there by myself with my kids, my husband gone. My mom moved to Alaska to help my sister. My dad went back to New Jersey, and then he ended up going back up to Alaska to help my sister too. My closest family was 24 hours away, and now my husband is moving to Alabama. Not that I wanted my mom and dad's help anymore, but it was just the realization that I was losing everyone, that all the pillars of my support system were actually gone. A few weeks later, we were getting a new commander. Rumors were filling the offices about why, but I just figured this is my chance to try again. I just so happened to be in one of the offices when the commander was in processing. So I went up to her, I introduced myself, I told her a little bit of my story, my plans to Palace Chase, And this godsend of a woman said, absolutely. I can completely understand why you'd want to take advantage of this program. It's what it's designed for. She said, send me the paperwork and I'll sign it as soon as I get it. And again, I tried to lean in and I tried to have the faith. My husband had gotten his date to be in Alabama and I still had nothing. Nothing signed, no paperwork, nothing. But every morning I went to work, I checked my email, and I had faith because she said she would sign it and I believed her. I knew we had change of command and she just got here. So moving in, it might take her a little bit for her to get to her office work. So I just kept the faith. Then one morning, I went to work, I opened my email, and there it was, signed and ready to go. It was so exciting. I closed it out, I reopened it again just to make sure it was real. I printed it out, I sent a copy to my personal email. I did not want to lose this documentation, but just having this signature was just the beginning. I had to now send this document along with my reasoning for wanting to separate and with all of my supporting documents to the big Air Force for AFPC, the big decider of yes or no. I submitted everything that day. AFPC usually took a long time to approve things, so I was told that it would take a couple months to hear back. So I waited. Again, my husband getting closer to leaving, packing up his dorm, doing his final tests and his final flights. And I remember I went home on lunch one day, and guys, this is the awakening that happened here, okay? I couldn't help it anymore. So I went home on lunch, and I was trying to avoid crying all day, but I went home, I cried on my bed, and I spoke to God so hard. I asked God to allow me to be his tool, to help others, so no one ever had to go through what I had been through or ever feel this way. I said, show me the way. I'm so tired of fighting and trying to control everything. I release control. I go with the flow. I am one with source energy. I'm one with the universe, and I am ready to release. I am here for the ride. I am yours, God. Help me see. Help me and my family be together finally. Please, God, I give it all to you. I'm tired of fighting and pushing against this energy. I give it to you. I release. Guys, the very next day, my Palace Chase paperwork was approved. I had a separation date that was super close to my husband's PCS date. The amount of love, gratitude, and emotion that came over my body was something that I just cannot explain to you. The relief itself was enough. I was going to have my family finally. Again, with the ups come some downs, but they were so much more manageable this time. We hit some hiccups with my recruiter. He never showed up to my out processing appointment, but I ended up tracking down his supervisor after calling a bunch of people. We got everything figured out, and I was headed off to Alabama with my kids. I had a reserve job waiting for me in Florida, and I was gone. I never looked back. My husband was in Alabama just a few days before we arrived. And it's actually really funny because the day that we were driving is the day that they put the ban on military travel for COVID. I had no idea. I was just driving as fast as I could to get to Alabama. I didn't find out until I arrived in Alabama that there was a ban on military travel. And at that point, I was only a few hours from our new home, and I wasn't stopping. There was no way you could have made me stop. For the first time in 6 years, my husband, my kids, and I, we all lived under the same roof again as a family, permanently this time. I remember walking into the door of our rental home and just the relief of seeing my husband waiting for us in the kitchen and just being in that house. It was just such an amazing feeling of relief and happiness and joy. I honestly can't even explain to you what this feeling was. But we moved into the rental home and I focused on myself. I focused on growing deeper spiritually. I did at-home workouts to help my health improve and watch what I was eating. So many people hated COVID. But to be honest, this was the most positively impactful time of my life. My mind and my body were finally at peace. The chaos of life and the world, it just stopped. But if you know me, you know that I can't sit still. So we decided to buy a house, and I fixed it up and I remodeled it when my husband was at work. We are a very forward moving and forward pressing people. Feeling restless in a calm environment is very common, especially for those of us who have lived in survival mode for so long. The quiet can feel uncomfortable, and we often try to distract ourselves to cope with that uncomfortable feeling. And for me, remodeling our home became a form of meditation, a way to channel my creative energy positively. I would listen to audiobooks and YouTube videos as I was tearing out carpets and laying tile, and just expanded my knowledge of the spiritual realm and the world of energy. It fascinated me how much I already knew. It was just, I didn't know things had terms and definitions and names to them. So I would listen all day and into the night, book after book, the whole time my kids were at school, just jobbing away and collecting this knowledge. Again, I knew a lot of it, and a lot of it made a lot of sense to me because I've done a lot of it as a child. And to be honest, I thought everyone had done all of this stuff regularly, like me. I didn't know it was considered energy healing or spiritual practices and abilities. I thought this was just normal human stuff. I did isolate myself and my family in Alabama. I didn't talk to a lot of family too much, but the interactions that I had with my siblings, there was no drama. My sisters even came down to visit, and we had an amazing weekend together. Two of my sisters came down for Easter with the kids, and we had a blast. Again, I know COVID was so hard for so many people, but for me, it was a good, hard reset of my entire life. I was able to establish boundaries, and I worked on my health as I was building a more deep and meaningful relationship with my kids, with my husband, and with my siblings. So as we wrap up this episode, I just want to take a quick moment to reflect on a few things that we've explored during this episode that I just think are extremely important to mention. When you go through an awakening, it is going to shake your entire foundation, your entire world. You feel guilt, you feel shame, you feel fear. And it's hard to begin setting those boundaries around the ones that you love and the people that you've cared for so many years. And choosing yourself for the first time, it feels selfish and it feels scary. It feels like you're doing something wrong. But setting boundaries isn't about just drawing lines. It's about reclaiming your personal power, nurturing your self-respect, and breaking free from the cycles of guilt and self-neglect, and realizing that it is not your responsibility for how other people react emotionally towards your boundaries. And I want you guys to listen to this next part extremely closely, okay? The intensity of guilt that you feel when you set boundaries does not mean that you are doing something wrong. The guilt you feel most often reflects and mirrors how deeply you are conditioned in childhood to put others first, to put others' needs before your own, to abandon yourself for the sake of others, for the sake of peace. Okay, so the connection between boundary, guilt, and self-abandonment, it's something that so many people, they just don't understand. Your early conditioning shaped your adult behaviors, relationships, and sense of self. The reason you self-sacrifice and second-guess all of your decisions is because of the way that you were raised, because of the limited beliefs put onto you by others. Most likely as a mirroring of how your parents or guardians showed up and expected you to show up. And where did they get their beliefs from? Their caregivers, their parents. Guys, this is generational patterns. This is the generational curses that many of you have been brought here to break. You are not limited. You are not a servant. You were not brought onto this earth to be a servant to the world and to your parents. You are capable of so much more than what they have made you believe. Your thoughts, your emotions, they matter, okay? And again, I'm not saying blame your parents because they probably didn't know or realize what they were doing, but I am saying take responsibility for your own healing and grow out of those limited belief systems that you have been surrounded by. I have to keep saying this again because it is just so important. Early childhood conditioning impacts our ability to set boundaries, specifically through family patterns and cultural expectations. And many of us, we were raised in environments where prioritizing others' needs over our own, it was seen as virtuous, even necessary to maintain that family harmony. But as we've seen, especially through my journey, carrying this conditioning into adulthood, it leads to patterns of self-abandonment, leaving us disconnected from our true self and trapped in the exhausting hole of neglecting our own emotions and needs and our feelings, digging us deeper and deeper into the hole of anxiety and depression as we seek to be the peacekeeper. Guys, I'm telling you, I didn't know who my true self for the longest time. I mean, I knew who I was and everything, but I didn't express any of my being very, very, very rarely. The cycle of self-abandonment and when people-pleasing becomes a survival strategy. Suppressing your needs, associating your self-worth with how much you do for others, and constantly striving to meet external expectations, it comes at such an intense, steep cost. Over time, this is just going to lead to feelings of emptiness, disconnection, and even mental health challenges like that anxiety, like that depression. And what's more is that these patterns can attract relationships that can exploit your tendency to say yes at all costs. And this just leads you further disconnected and further in the hole of isolation. The emotional complexity of boundary setting, guilt. It starts with acknowledging that guilt is often a reflection of how deeply that we've been conditioned, not as a sign that you're doing something wrong, okay? In fact, feeling that guilt when setting boundaries, it can actually be a powerful indicator of growth. It shows that you're challenging old patterns, pushing past the discomfort, and taking steps towards living a more authentic and a more aligned life. So separating guilt from responsibility is key at this moment, okay? It's key at this level in this phase. And again, I cannot stress this enough. You are not responsible for managing others' emotional reactions to your boundaries. You are not responsible for managing them and their emotions. You're not. That's not your responsibility. The healing journey requires practical ways to move forward. Instead of looking at boundaries as taking away from someone, look at it as giving back to you. Taking care of yourself for maybe the first time in your life. Reframe those boundaries as acts of self-care to build self-worth and maybe go see some therapeutic support. The road to authentic living, it requires consistent self-compassion and self-awareness. Boundaries are not barriers. They're guidelines that protect your emotional, physical, and mental well-being while also allowing you to show up more fully and more authentic in your relationships and in your life. A relationship cannot happen unless both parties understand each other's boundaries and respect them. There cannot be a relationship if either party does not respect the other person's boundaries. It just cannot happen. So as we close, I want you to take this with you. The guilt that you feel when setting boundaries, it does not mean that you're failing. It means that you are growing. Reclaiming your sense of self and learning to honor your needs, it takes time and it takes practice. But it is one of the most profound acts of self-love that you can give yourself. So I do want to thank you guys all for sharing this time with me, joining me along this journey today. Next week, we are going to dive into a conversation that you won't even believe is real life. But I promise it was, unfortunately, 100% real. As always, I am here to support you as you explore, as you heal, as you grow. Okay, so until next time, take care of yourself. You are absolutely worth it and you deserve it. Have a beautiful day.